Imagine looking at a timeline of human history and, expecting to see this really clean, rational line of cause and effect.
Right, like you want to see the exact moment a policy was signed or a piece of tech was invented.
Exactly. You want to
Yeah.
trace the motivations perfectly back to their source. But instead, you find this messy collision of, well, a child's broken Nintendo console, the screeching dial-up modems of the 1990s internet, and the smoke rising from the Pentagon on September 11th.
It's quite a mix.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we aren't here to, litigate international espionage or anything like that. We are performing a kind of psychological and technological forensics mission. We're going to explore the origin story of the world's most famous whistleblower.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're thrilled you're here with us.
We are looking at excerpts from the memoir Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. And right away, the physical book itself just sends this massive message.
Oh, totally. The cover is just a stark white background with black text.
Yeah. No author photo, no dramatic shadowy hacker imagery, just his name and the title.
It's an incredibly deliberate aesthetic choice. Because,
Yeah.
the entire narrative wrestles with what it actually means to leave a trace of yourself behind in the world.
Right.
When you strip away all those political firestorms of 2013, the government fallout, the Hawaiian tunnels, all the stuff we are deliberately putting to the side today, what you're left with is a highly specific origin story.
Yeah, we're basically looking at a young man who started as a technologist for the CIA and the NSA. Someone who was, deep inside the machine.
He was actively engineering the architecture for global mass surveillance.
He was the guy building the very system that collected the world's digital communications.
Yes.
And he made them endlessly searchable.
Right. And the core tension we're exploring today is how his specific upbringing forced him to view that very system as a fundamental violation of human liberty.
It's a huge pivot.
It is. What's fascinating here is that to understand how someone makes that leap from architect to whistleblower, we actually have to track the simultaneous death of two distinct eras.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, we're looking at the extinction of the analog childhood and at the same time, the extinction of the anarchic, anonymous early internet.
Yeah.
The author's life runs perfectly parallel to both of these vanishing frontiers.
That timeline paradox really begins immediately with his birth. He points out that he was born in 1983.
Which isn't just a random year on the calendar.
No, not at all. It perfectly coincided with the birth of the modern digital age. The architecture of his life and the architecture of the internet kind of share this exact origin point.
Exactly. 1983 is a total watershed moment in the history of computing.
Right.
Prior to this, the U.S. Department of Defense operated ARPANET, which was this sprawling, interconnected system of computers.
Which had universities and the military all mixed together.
Yes, and in 1983, the military realized that having defense communications on the exact same network as university researchers was a massive security liability.
I mean, obviously.
Right. So they split the network. They created MilNet for the defense establishment, and the remaining civilian nodes were left to become what you and I now recognize as the public internet.
So he was literally born the exact same year the internet as a public entity was born.
He was.
And the text uses this coincidence to set up a really profound contrast in how human beings experience time. There's this brilliant story about his 6th birthday.
Oh, the clock story.
Yes, he's having a fantastic day. He doesn't want it to end. And, bedtime is fast approaching.
The universal childhood dilemma.
Exactly. He writes that instead of engaging in what he calls civil disobedience, like crying or throwing a tantrum, he opts for direct action.
Which is such a funny way to phrase it.
It's hilarious. He covertly wanders around his house in North Carolina, physically resetting all the clocks to roll back time. And he specifically targets the microwave clock.
Because it's the only digital display a 6-year-old can easily reach.
Right. He genuinely believed that by altering that digital display, he was manipulating the flow of time itself.
He felt like he had totally outsmarted the universe.
And the adults didn't even notice.
But he's using this childhood anecdote to establish a real baseline for how systems govern our reality.
How so?
He contrasts his analog childhood, where time was something you could manually manipulate on a kitchen appliance, with how you and I interact with time today using our smartphones.
Right, because if I buy a new digital watch today, I don't set the time manually. I just look at my smartphone to see what time it is, and my watch syncs to it.
But that begs the question, right? How does the phone know?
It's not just, guessing based on the sun.
Exactly. And this is where he introduces the underlying invisible architecture of our lives. Protocols.
Protocols.
Yeah. When your phone needs the time, it doesn't just guess. It executes a silent, instantaneous query to your service provider's network.
Okay.
That network queries a higher tier network, routing all the way up to a network time server. These servers are designated as Stratum 1.
Stratum 1, okay.
And they're directly hardwired to Stratum 0 devices, which are actual atomic clocks relying on the vibration of atoms to measure time with, like, incomprehensible precision.
And all of this happens in literally milliseconds.
Precisely. It happens via NTP, the Network Time Protocol.
Wow.
The protocol even calculates the latency, the microscopic fraction of a second it took for the signal to travel from the atomic clock to your phone.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, and it adjusts the displayed time to account for that travel delay.
The author describes protocols as the invisible languages of machines. It's this agreed-upon set of rules that allow completely different pieces of hardware to understand each other.
Yeah, he uses an analogy about letters and envelopes for this.
He does, but frankly, I think of it more like a global shipping container network.
Oh, interesting. How do you mean?
Well, think about the physical supply chain, right? You have a factory in Shenzhen, you've got a cargo ship on the Pacific, a train in Chicago, a semi-truck in Ohio. They are completely different machines, operated by completely different companies. But they all use the exact same standardized 40-foot corrugated steel shipping container.
Ah, I see.
The protocol is the container. The ship doesn't need to know if it's carrying plush toys or car engines. It just knows how to lock the container into its grid.
That makes perfect sense.
So the text divides these digital protocols into two layers. You have application protocols like HTTP for web browsing or IMP for email. That's the plush toy inside the box. That's the actual data you want.
And then you have the transport protocols.
Exactly. Transport protocols like TCP or UDP are the 40-foot steel containers.
Let's unpack TCP for a second. Transmission Control Protocol.
Yeah.
It's incredibly meticulous. It takes a web page, chops it up into thousands of little data packets, numbers them, and sends them across the world.
Right, and then what?
Then the receiving computer checks the numbers to make sure every single packet arrived before reassembling the page. If a packet is missing, it actually demands a resend.
Oh, so that's why a web page might load slowly, but it eventually loads perfectly.
Exactly. UDP, on the other hand, is used for live video or audio streaming.
How is that different?
It just blasts the packets at you. If some get lost along the way, the video just drops a frame or glitches, but the stream just keeps moving forward.
It's a highly effective way to visualize it. And the reason the author dives so deeply into the mechanics of TCP and UDP isn't to just give us a computer science lecture.
Definitely not.
It's to explain the mechanism of our own permanent capture.
Yes.
These protocols are what allowed humanity to digitize practically everything.
Yeah.
And the chilling reality he presents is that to digitize a piece of information is to record it in a format that will last forever, perfectly replicated, without degradation.
Which brings us to the tragedy of his generation. He explicitly calls the people born in the early 1980s the last analog generation.
Yeah, that really stuck with me. You and I have our lives backed up on remote servers in redundant data centers.
Every photo, every text, every location, ping.
Right. But his childhood milestones are trapped in physical, degrading artifacts.
He describes his growth spurts being notched into a wooden door frame with a pocket knife, not logged into some pediatrician's cloud portal.
Exactly.
His family memories are recorded on magnetic VHS tape, and the physics of VHS tape is just entirely unforgiving.
Yeah, over time, the magnetic oxide particles on the tape literally lose their polarity.
The colors bleed, the audio warbles, the static creeps in.
And eventually, the memory is just entirely erased by the ambient magnetism of the Earth. His early life is structurally designed to be forgotten.
And the irony is deafening there.
It really is.
The generation whose childhoods are physically evaporating into static is the exact same generation that built the digital architecture, ensuring nobody else will ever be forgotten again.
Wow. We've replaced the mercy of forgetting with the burden of perfect recall.
That is the foundational paradox of his worldview. And because he didn't have a cloud server meticulously cataloging his mistakes and milestones, he had to learn about the permanence of actions from a very different source.
He didn't learn about mortality from a degrading VHS tape.
No, he learned it from the strict algorithmic parameters of an 8-bit video game console.
The Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yeah.
Specifically, the 1.0 edition of Super Mario Bros.
It's wild. He extracts this wildly profound philosophical lesson from a game about an Italian plumber eating mushrooms.
It really reveals how a young mind, oriented towards systems logic, processes reality.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanics of the game.
All right.
In the original Super Mario Bros., the hardware limitations of the NES meant that the console didn't have enough memory to render the entire level at once.
Right, it was just too weak.
Exactly.
Wow.
It could only render what was immediately on the screen. So as Mario moves to the right, new scenery is loaded into memory, and the old scenery behind him is just dumped.
In gaming terms, this creates an invisible wall on the left side of the screen.
Right. Mario can move forward, he can jump, he can duck, but he can never, ever walk backward. The system physically prevents it.
The author absorbs this memory management trick as a visceral metaphor for the unidirectional flow of time.
Life only scrolls to the right.
Yes. No matter what mistakes you make, no matter what power-ups you miss, that invisible wall is always directly behind you, pushing you forward into the unknown.
The machine doesn't care about your regret. It only processes your inputs.
He's just learned that machines operate on absolute, unforgiving logic.
But when he tries to apply that same strict logic to the adult world, he runs headfirst into a very different kind of system.
Yeah, he discovers the chaos of human ego.
And this transition from the logic of machines to the tyranny of human rules really starts with him spying on his father.
The layout of their house in North Carolina was kind of peculiar.
It was. Due to an addition, the window in the author's bedroom didn't look outside into the yard.
Oh, right.
It looked directly into the family den.
So late at night, the young author would stand on his bed, peel back the curtain, and watch his father interact with one of the first home computer systems.
His dad was an electronics instructor in the Coast Guard, and he brought home a Commodore 64.
Which, for anyone who didn't grow up with one, this wasn't a sleek laptop.
Not at all.
It was a massive beige brick of a keyboard with cables jutting out of it, plugging into a CRT television.
And loading a game wasn't a matter of just double-clicking an icon.
No, you had to type specific command line syntax to pull data from a cassette tape drive or a floppy disk block by block into the computer's tiny RAM.
Right, and the author would watch his father navigate this archaic system to play Choplifter.
That's a game where you pilot a helicopter, shoot jets, and rescue tiny hostages, right?
Exactly. And he views his dad as this heroic figure flying nighttime rescue missions in the den.
Until his dad successfully completes a particularly difficult level, throws his hands up in victory, and catches his son's face pressed against the glass.
But the father doesn't punish him.
No. He pulls the kid through the window, unplugs a second joystick, and lets him sit on his lap to be the co-pilot. It's a real initiation.
It really establishes technology as a shared language between them.
Right.
But the critical lesson regarding technology and authority happens a bit later, involving that same Nintendo console we mentioned.
Oh, the breaking of the NES.
Yes. The NES stops working. The screen is filled with garbled, flashing blotches.
Every kid in the 80s and 90s knows this exact panic. And we all did the exact same thing.
Which was?
We pulled the cartridge out, flew into it as hard as we could, slammed it back in, and pressed the power button.
Which is actually the worst thing you can possibly do.
Right. I didn't know this until way later, but blowing into the cartridge introduces moisture from your breath onto the exposed copper pins.
Yeah, and the NES used a zero insertion force, or ZIF, connector.
It was a terrible design choice by Nintendo, meant to mimic the action of a VCR, pushing the cartridge in and pressing it down.
Over time, that mechanism bent the pins.
Yeah, and the moisture from kids blowing into the cartridges caused the copper to oxidize and rust, completely ruining the connection.
Well, the author, at 7 years old, doesn't know about oxidation.
No, he just knows his dad is away on a 2-week Coast Guard trip, and he is desperate to play Mario.
So he decides to bypass the parental authority structure and fix the machine himself.
He sneaks into his dad's toolbox, takes a flathead screwdriver, and unscrews the casing.
He exposes the entire green motherboard, wiping down the delicate traces with a paper towel.
Which is horrifying to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then he tries to force the plastic casing back together, but he misaligns it.
The plastic bulges. The power button won't depress. He is completely bricked the Nintendo.
He spends the next few days in absolute terror waiting for his father's return.
He assumes the punishment will be severe.
But when the father discovers the ruined console, his reaction is entirely unexpected.
He isn't angry about the broken plastic. He actually uses it as a pedagogical moment.
Instead of a lecture on destruction, he gets a lecture on systems analysis.
The father explains that understanding how a machine operates is a fundamental human responsibility.
Right. If you rely on a piece of technology, you must understand its architecture.
You have to be able to break it down into its component parts to determine if the design is efficient. If it breaks, you fix it. If the design is flawed, you modify it.
The father's philosophy is stark. If you refuse to understand the basic operation of the equipment you depend on, you are passively accepting technological tyranny.
If you don't understand your possessions, they possess you.
That is a staggering concept to hand to a 7-year-old.
It really is. It's the difference between being a consumer and being an engineer.
And to solidify this, the dad takes him to his Coast Guard laboratory.
Which is where the boy meets his first true general-purpose computer.
Not a toy designed to play games, but a machine designed to compute.
It's a green screen terminal. And the father writes a few lines of basic code on a Post-it note and walks away, leaving his son to decipher it.
The code is simple. 10, input. What is your name? Name, followed by a second line. 20, print hello plus name plus imic.
The kid types it out, hunting and pecking on the keyboard. He hits enter.
The machine allocates a tiny piece of its memory to a variable called name, prints the question on the screen, and stops. It just waits.
The author types Eddie and hits enter again.
The processor retrieves the data from memory and executes the second line, outputting, hello, Eddie.
To the young author, this is a revelation. He has just experienced a purely logical relationship.
The computer doesn't judge him.
Right.
It doesn't tell him to sit up straight. It doesn't get tired or angry. It operates strictly on the laws of cause and effect.
Flawed input yields flawed output. Flawless input yields flawless output.
A computer will wait for a command for a millennium and execute it in a microsecond without asking why.
He feels an absolute sense of fairness that he has never experienced with a human being.
And this sets up a massive collision course when he enters adolescence.
Because when the family moves to Maryland, he begins to analyze the human systems around him, specifically his middle school, using the exact same systems logic he applies to software.
He realizes that schools are just complex systems governed by rule sets, known as syllabi.
But unlike the immutable laws of computer code, human rule sets are vulnerable to exploitation because the people writing them are fallible.
So he decides to hack his middle school grading rubric.
He reads the syllabus for his math class and breaks down the point distribution. He discovers a structural vulnerability.
What did he find?
If quizzes and tests account for a combined 60 or 70% of the final grade, and homework accounts for the rest, he realizes that if he aces every single test but does absolute zero homework, his average will sit mathematically right at a passing C or low B.
Oh, wow.
He executes the exploit perfectly. He stops doing homework entirely, enjoying a state of absolute post-school freedom while still passing the class.
But he makes a critical error. He fails to account for the ego of the sysadmin in this case, his math teacher, Mr. Stockton.
Mr. Stockton calls him out in front of the class, asking why his homework is missing.
And their author, thinking they're just two rational actors analyzing a system, cheerfully explains his mathematical hack.
He expects the teacher to acknowledge the cleverness of the exploit.
Instead, the very next day, Mr. Stockton distributes a brand new, revised syllabus,
which contained a newly invented clause stating that missing more than 6 homework assignments over the course of the semester will result in an automatic failure, regardless of test scores.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to jump in here, because I really struggle with the author's framing of this event.
Fair enough.
Millions of middle schoolers absolutely hate homework and try to find ways out of doing it. Framing this as an application of high-level systems thinking feels like a very convenient post hoc justification for typical teenage laziness.
That's a valid point.
Is he really a mastermind testing structural vulnerabilities? Or is this just standard boring rebellion dressed up in tech jargon to sound impressive?
It's a fair scrutiny. It is certainly teenage rebellion. But what matters isn't the nobility of his action. What matters is the lesson he extracts from the teacher's reaction.
Okay, what was the lesson?
When a hacker finds a vulnerability in a software system and exposes it, the code is patched to make the system more secure and efficient for everyone.
Right.
But when he exposed the flaw in the grading system, the teacher didn't patch the system to make it better. The teacher arbitrarily rewrote the laws of reality simply to retain dominance and force compliance.
It's the classic "because I said so" defense.
Exactly. A computer cannot change its programming out of spite. It cannot invent a new rule simply because its authority was questioned.
So this single incident cements a profound, lifelong belief in the author.
Yes, that technology is inherently more honest than human institutions. Human systems are hypocritical, designed to protect the power of the rule makers.
To hack a system is simply to expose its hypocrisy.
That distinction is crucial. He retreats from the hypocrisy of the physical world and seeks sanctuary in a place governed entirely by the honesty of code.
The 1990s World Wide Web.
Yes, and this brings us to an incredibly nostalgic, almost utopian section of the text.
His family acquires a compact Presario 425 desktop computer.
To give you an idea of the hardware, it possessed a 25 megahertz processor and a 200 megabyte hard drive.
A modern digital thermometer likely possesses more raw computing power.
But to him, it was an infinite expanse.
He describes the visceral, acoustic reality of the early internet. Today, Wi-Fi is silent and invisible. But back then, connecting to the internet was a loud, physical event.
You used a dial-up modem.
He writes about the screeching, hissing, and beeping of the handshake process. And if you picked up an extension telephone in the house while someone was online, you didn't hear silence.
No, you heard the raw acoustic transmission of data. You could physically hear the computers negotiating with each other.
This raw, unpolished technology fostered a specific culture.
The internet of the 1990s was not corporatized. There were no algorithmic feeds designed to maximize engagement and serve targeted advertisements.
It was a chaotic anarchy driven entirely by human passion.
He talks about GeoCities,
Which was a web hosting service that allowed regular people to build their own rudimentary websites using raw HTML.
You had pages with neon green backgrounds, blinking text, and low-resolution GIFs of spinning skulls.
But the aesthetic isn't the point. The point is that the web was built by enthusiastic amateurs sharing knowledge for absolutely free.
He gravitated toward bulletin board systems or BBSs and internet relay chat.
A BBS was essentially a standalone computer sitting in someone's basement that you would dial directly into over the phone line, right?
Yeah, and the person running it, the sysop, maintained it out of sheer dedication to a topic, whether that was astrophysics, punk music, or computer hardware.
And the author, as a young teenager, would log onto these boards and ask highly technical, panicked questions about motherboard compatibility or syntax errors.
And adult computer science professors or senior network engineers from the other side of the world would spend hours writing him 2,000-word troubleshooting guides.
And they did this because on the internet, your physical attributes were totally irrelevant.
They didn't know they were talking to a 13-year-old kid. They only saw a username and an eagerness to learn.
The meritocracy of the early web was based entirely on your intellectual contribution.
Which introduces the core psychological mechanism of his teenage years.
The concept of alts, or alternative identities.
He played a text-heavy, massive, multiplayer role-playing game called Ultima Online.
In this game, he could inhabit multiple personas. He could be a warrior, a merchant, or a thief.
And if he made a mistake, if his character gained a terrible reputation, or if he posted something embarrassingly immature on a message board, he wasn't trapped by it.
It's almost like being a digital hermit crab.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The second you outgrow a shell, or if that shell gets damaged in a fight, or you just realize it's an ugly shell, you just scuttle out of it, walk away, and find a brand new one.
You leave all the baggage behind.
You just create a new username, a new alt, and log back in as a completely new entity.
He described this anonymity as a reset button for life.
No.
And he argues that this dissociative capability was actually the engine of intellectual growth.
How so?
Think about the psychology of an argument today. If you post an opinion on a social media platform under your real name and someone proves you wrong, the human instinct is to dig in.
You become defensive.
Yes, you double down on your error to protect your public ego.
Because your legal identity is on the line.
Exactly. But in the 1990s, if you were proven wrong, you didn't have to defend a bad argument.
You could just concede, drop the username, and reinvent yourself the next day with a better, more informed perspective.
Mistakes were punished by the community, but they were instantly forgiven by the architecture because you could shed your digital skin.
But the text is deeply, almost aggressively mournful about what happened next.
That utopia didn't last.
He attributes the death of this anarchic web to the rise of what he calls surveillance capitalism.
When the early dot-com bubble burst, the tech industry realized a harsh truth. People didn't actually want to buy physical things online. They wanted to communicate and share their lives.
The value wasn't in e-commerce. It was in human connection.
So the corporations realized they needed to monetize the connection itself.
And the only way to make user data valuable to advertisers is to guarantee that the data accurately reflects a real human being with real purchasing power.
Therefore, the industry, often with the enthusiastic cooperation of governments, worked relentlessly to strip away anonymity.
They demanded your real name, your real phone number, your actual location.
They irrevocably tethered your offline legal identity to your digital footprint.
The author argues that this destruction of the alt forced ideological conformity.
You can no longer make a mistake and start over.
Your permanent record follows you everywhere, creating a chilling effect on free thought and experimentation.
The utopia died because the digital mask was forcibly removed.
But the freedom he felt wearing those masks online stands in incredibly stark contrast to the physical reality he was living in.
Very true.
While he was exploring the boundless freedom of the web, his actual body was located inside a highly classified, intensely secretive company town. We need to pivot to the Beltway monoculture.
The environmental conditioning he experienced in Maryland is a vital piece of the psychological puzzle.
His family wasn't just casually patriotic.
No, they were deeply embedded in the federal apparatus. He traces his mother's lineage back to the Mayflower, with ancestors fighting in every major American conflict.
His grandfather was a rear admiral in the Coast Guard and later a senior official at the FBI. His father was a Coast Guard officer.
Duty, service, and institutional loyalty are literally woven into his DNA.
When he is nearing 9 years old, the family moves to Crofton, Maryland. And Crofton is geographically positioned in the shadow of Fort Meade.
Fort Meade is the headquarters of the National Security Agency, the NSA.
But describing it as a mere military base doesn't capture the scale.
It is a sprawling, self-contained city-state.
The statistics in the text are staggering. The installation supported over 125,000 employees and housed more than 115 distinct government agencies.
If you lived in Crofton, your neighbors didn't work in manufacturing or finance. They worked for the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, or the FBI.
The author notes that every girl he ever had a crush on in middle school had a father who carried a badge and a gun.
It was an absolute monoculture. The sole export of the region was government intelligence.
And this environment normalizes an extreme, almost pathological level of secrecy.
The author's mother eventually took a job as a clerk processing retirement pensions for NSA employees.
This is mundane administrative paperwork.
But to get the job, she had to undergo a full-scope polygraph examination.
A polygraph is not a casual interview.
It measures minute physiological changes. Respiration rate via pneumograph tubes across the chest, cardiovascular activity via a blood pressure cuff, and galvanic skin response via electrodes on the fingertips.
They are measuring the physical stress of deception.
She had to sit in a room, strapped to these sensors, and be interrogated about her past, her finances, her loyalties, just to process pension forms.
And the author points out the profound social consequence of this. Nobody talked about their work, ever.
The compartmentalization was so deep that spouses were often entirely ignorant of what their partners did for a living.
You live next to people who were legally forbidden from being honest with you.
Against this backdrop of professional, institutional secrecy, the author's own family begins to fracture.
His parents undergo a painful, protracted divorce.
He is already struggling to fit in at school, mocked for his lingering Southern accent, but the divorce drives him inward.
He contracts a severe case of infectious mononucleosis, missing months of school. The physical illness compounds a profound psychological depression.
He ultimately drops out of high school entirely, choosing to pursue his GED through a community college program.
During this period of intense vulnerability and isolation, his anxieties start manifesting in fascinating ways.
There is an incredible anecdote in the text about how a deeply anxious 15-year-old hacker attempts to self-soothe.
He's terrified of global instability and nuclear weapons. So what does he do?
He connects to the internet and targets the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the premier nuclear research facility in the United States.
He isn't trying to steal launch codes. He is applying that systems analysis mindset to see if the institution guarding the world's most dangerous weapons is actually competent.
And because this is the late 1990s, the internet is full of gaping structural holes. He discovers a vulnerability known as an open directory structure.
How exactly does that work? I hear directory walking, and I picture someone just opening digital manila folders.
It's actually not far off. Web servers like Apache rely on index files, usually named index.html.
Okay.
When you type in a URL, the server looks for that specific file to display the web page. But if the system administrator forgets to include an index file in a specific folder and hasn't explicitly disabled directory browsing in the server's configuration, the server panics.
It panics.
Well, it just displays a raw text list of every single file in that folder to anyone who asks.
It's like walking into a library asking for a specific book, and instead, the librarian just
hands you the master keys to the archives and walks away.
Exactly. The young author realizes he can simply manipulate the URL structure in his browser moving up and down the directory tree of the Los Alamos servers.
He starts stumbling upon unencrypted interoffice memos, internal employee directories, and sensitive organizational data.
He has walked straight through an unlocked digital door at a nuclear facility.
But crucially, his instinct isn't to exploit this for personal gain. His upbringing in a military family kicks in.
He feels a civic duty to report the vulnerability.
He emails the webmaster. When he gets no response, he calls the general information line.
Imagine this 15-year-old kid stammering to an operator about server configurations, leaving a voicemail, and diligently spelling out his last name using the military phonetic alphabet Sierra, November, Oscar, Whiskey.
Weeks go by, and then the IT department from the nuclear laboratory actually calls his house.
His mother answers the phone. She hears that Los Alamos is calling for her high school dropout son, and she is paralyzed with fear.
She thinks he's triggered World War III from the Compact Rosario.
She interrogates him like, "What did you do?"
But the IT guy on the other end of the line is just calling to thank him. They patched the server configuration, fixed the vulnerability, and the guy tells a teenager to call back for a job when he turns 18.
It's a humorous moment, but it perfectly illustrates his psychological baseline. He believes that if you find a flaw in a system, you are morally obligated to expose it so it can be fixed.
But the secrecy of his environment also forced him to develop a different kind of skill. The text introduces a concept that I think is the key to his entire personality. He calls it human encryption.
When I hear that term, my mind immediately goes to code switching. Is human encryption just putting on a polite face at a dinner party, or is it an active erasure of your personality?
In the context of the intelligence community, it is an active defensive erasure. Spies and intelligence workers are trained to subsume their core identity into a shell of aggressive normalcy.
You drive a beige sedan. You wear unmemorable clothing.
You speak in platitudes. You scramble your true motivations and lock them away behind a cipher of utter mediocrity to protect your classified realities.
The paradox is that the more you know about the secret lives of others, the less you're allowed to know about yourself.
But he didn't learn this technique at the farm, the CIA training facility.
No, he learned it in his own living room. He developed human encryption as a coping mechanism for his parents' divorce.
As the family fractured, he became a shapeshifter. He wore whatever emotional mask the people around him required him to wear to maintain peace.
He became the keeper of secrets between his mother and his father. He projected a false, unthreatening maturity.
He started insisting people call him Ed instead of Eddie, clipped a cell phone to his belt, and completely encrypted his internal trauma behind a facade of stoic independence.
He learned advanced spycraft by trying not to be a burden to his grieving parents. It's heartbreaking.
And it poses a profound psychological question. If your entire formative reality, both inside your fractured home and outside in a community dominated by the NSA, is built entirely on hidden truths and compartmentalized secrets, how does that shape your relationship with transparency?
You become uniquely, obsessively attuned to finding the raw, unencrypted truth beneath the surface, because you know the surface is always a lie.
This brings us to the ultimate friction point of the narrative.
Because right now, the profile we have built is of an anti-authoritarian hacker. He distrusts arbitrary human rules. He loves the anarchy of the early web. He values anonymity.
How does this specific young man suddenly decide to abandon his principles and volunteer for the United States military?
To understand that pivot, we have to look at the catalyst that shattered his reality. We have to talk about the morning of September 11th, 2001.
The author was working as a freelance web designer. He had partnered with a 25-year-old woman he met in a community college Japanese class, whom he refers to as May.
He was completely infatuated with her. They run a small business called Squirreling Industries, and he's writing code for $30 an hour.
But the surreal part is their office location. May's husband, Norm, is an Air Force linguist assigned to the NSA.
And because of this, they live in a townhouse situated directly on the Fort Meade military installation.
The author points out an operational detail that seems unimaginable today. Prior to 9/11, access to the NSA base was shockingly permissive.
He would routinely drive his 1992 Honda Civic right past the perimeter guards without having to display identification or submit to a vehicle search.
So it's the morning of September 11th. He is running late for work, speeding down the Maryland highway with the radio on.
He hears a fragmented report about a plane crashing into a building in New York. He assumes it's a tragic accident with a small Cessna.
He arrives at May's house on the base, and they load up a news website. Suddenly, the phone rings. It's May's husband calling from inside the black glass towers of the NSA.
The second plane has hit the South Tower. The husband is panicked. He orders May to send the author off the base immediately because security is about to lock down the perimeter.
Minutes later, the husband calls back with a far more terrifying update. The Pentagon has been hit.
The author gets in his Civic and tries to leave, but he drives straight into a tide of madness. General Michael Hayden, the director of the NSA, has ordered an unprecedented, total evacuation of the headquarters.
The entire intelligence apparatus is fleeing. He is caught in a massive traffic jam of intelligence officers abandoning their posts.
Horns are blaring on a classified military installation, and the technical infrastructure begins to collapse. The cell phone networks are completely overwhelmed.
It's chaos.
How does the cell network actually fail like that? Is it just too many voices at once?
It's a failure of the signaling architecture. Cell towers have a limited number of radio frequency channels, but before your voice even uses a channel, the network uses a protocol called SS7 to negotiate the connection.
Oh, finding the receiving phone, ringing it, and allocating the bandwidth.
Yes. On 911, millions of people simultaneously tried to initiate calls. The SS7 signaling networks were suffocated by connection requests.
Wow.
The switches literally couldn't process the volume of commands, causing the towers to reject nearly all outgoing calls. The grid was functionally paralyzed.
So he is sitting in gridlock, completely cut off from the world, unable to reach his mother or his father.
He realizes that despite his deep understanding of systems and code, he is utterly, humiliatingly powerless in the face of physical terror.
He eventually navigates the chaos and confirms his family is safe. His grandfather was unharmed. His father, working at Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C., had actually stood by the river and watched the column of black smoke rising from the Pentagon.
And his father relays a phrase he heard from another officer, a phrase that violently rewired the author's worldview. They just bombed the Pentagon.
The author zeroes in on that pronoun, they. For the first time in his life, the world wasn't a complex spectrum of systems. It was reduced to a brutal binary. Us versus them.
He captures the immediate visceral mood of the United States. The sudden proliferation of flags hanging from highway overpasses. The sudden scarcity of firearms at sporting goods stores.
The intense, blinding thirst for retaliation.
But because of his location, he captures a secondary, hidden reaction specific to the Beltway, the crushing, suffocating guilt of the intelligence community.
He writes that nearly 100,000 spies and analysts returned to work in the days following the attacks, carrying the knowledge that they had fundamentally failed at their only job, protecting the homeland.
And this guilt became the engine of the new era.
Right.
The leadership of the intelligence agencies leveraged their own internal failure, combined with the external terror of the American public, to demand sweeping, unprecedented new powers.
The legal and operational mandates were expanded beyond anything the public could have previously comprehended.
The goal shifted from targeted intelligence gathering to bulk data collection.
And the young hacker, the kid who hated rules and loved anonymity, is swept right up into the fervor.
He completely abandons his hacker ethos.
He admits, with brutal candor, that his rational judgment was entirely defeated by his emotional heart. He embraced the government's narrative without question. He wanted to be a liberator. He wanted vengeance.
He decided his technical skills were useless. He needed to fight physically. But because he lacked a traditional 4-year college degree, the intelligence agencies wouldn't hire him for the elite cyber warfare roles he coveted.
So he took the most direct, brutal path available. He enlisted in the United States Army.
He didn't just enlist as a regular infantryman. He signed an 18 X-ray contract.
The 18 X-ray program is a specific, high-attrition pipeline designed to funnel recruits directly from civilian life into the Special Forces selection course.
It requires a grueling level of physical and mental endurance.
And the physical mismatch is almost comical. The text describes him arriving at Fort Benning for basic training. He is 5'9" and weighs 124 pounds. He is practically skeletal.
And the drill sergeants pair him up with a recruit he nicknames Daisy, who is a 300-pound steroid-injecting bodybuilder.
They force this tiny hacker to carry the massive bodybuilder in buddy carry, sprints across the training yard.
Surprisingly, the author's physical deficits initially serve as advantages.
Oh.
Yeah, in body weight exercises, his light frame allows him to max out his push-up and pull-up scores, while the heavy bodybuilder struggles against his own mass. He navigates the obstacle courses with agility.
But the relentless physical reality of the military cannot be hacked. It eventually destroys him.
What happened?
During a land navigation exercise, he is carrying a 50-pound rucksack. He's wearing combat boots that were issued to him a size too large. He climbs up onto a fallen pine tree to get a better vantage point for his compass bearing.
Okay.
As he prepares to jump down, he looks at the ground and spots a snake coiled exactly where his boots are going to land.
In a desperate midair attempt to alter his trajectory and avoid the strike, he twists his body awkwardly.
He lands violently, suffering severe compound fractures in his lower extremities. The injury is catastrophic for an infantryman.
He spends weeks trying to hide the pain, marching on fractured bones until he physically collapses.
He is ultimately discharged from the military, washing out of the program on crutches.
I have to pause here and look at this sequence of events with intense scrutiny.
Go ahead.
How does a guy who inherently distrusts human authority, who recognized the hypocrisy of his middle school teachers, who understood the pure logic of machines, how does he justify blindly handing his body and his mind over to the ultimate human authority structure, the military, to support the war on terror?
Does he just conveniently forget his principles, or is he a hypocrite?
It is the most vital question of the text, and the author does not spare himself from the criticism. He explicitly identifies his reflexive, unquestioning support for the post-9/11 wars as the single greatest regret of his life.
He dissects his own hypocrisy.
Yes, the psychological trauma of the attacks created an emotional vacuum, and when people are terrified, they crave certainty.
The simplistic S versus them binary filled that vacuum perfectly.
He surrendered his critical thinking because it was easier to follow orders than to live in a state of terror.
He writes that he was rebooted as a vehicle of vengeance.
Precisely. And this confession serves a larger architectural purpose in the memoir. He is synthesizing a tragic realization for the reader.
Which is?
When he eventually transitions back to the intelligence community as a civilian contractor and helps build the architecture of mass surveillance, he realizes a terrifying truth.
The surveillance state wasn't merely imposed on a helpless public by a shadowy cabal of government villains. It was born from the desperate, willing consent of the American people.
The public demanded it.
Yes. The public was so traumatized by the surprise of the attacks that they willingly, eagerly traded their civil liberties for the illusion of total security.
The public demanded that the government never be caught off guard again, and the author acknowledges that he was part of that panicked public.
To eliminate the element of surprise, you have to collect every single piece of data in existence. You have to record everything.
If we bring this entire narrative full circle, the arc is staggering.
We've traced the life of a boy who understood that time moves in only one direction, who found freedom in the anonymity of the anarchic early internet, and who learned that technology was fundamentally fair.
But when trauma struck, he watched his country try to apply the rigid, unforgiving logic of a machine to the chaotic, unpredictable reality of human behavior.
The government attempted to solve the problem of human violence with a digital protocol. They built a system that collects, packetizes, and perfectly stores our lives in a permanent record, eliminating the possibility of forgetting and destroying the anonymity of the alt.
And the cost of that system is the very liberty he thought he was enlisting to protect. We traded the messy, degrading, forgiving nature of the VHS tape for the pristine, inescapable memory of the cloud server.
Which leads to a final thought I want to leave you with today.
What's that?
The author mourns that his generation was the last to have their childhoods physically fade away. But consider the device sitting in your pocket or on your desk right now. We constantly talk about surveillance as an act of aggression, as something the government or a corporation does to us without our consent.
But look at how we behave today. Look at how eagerly we document our locations, our preferences, our biometric data, and our private thoughts on platforms designed to monetize our attention.
Ask yourself, to what extent have we acted as the willing architects of the very permanent record we claim to fear?
We didn't just surrender to the surveillance state. We bought the hardware, installed the apps, and provided the data for free.
We stepped out of the comforting binary of before and after, and waded entirely on our own into the murky waters of our own capture.
A sobering thought.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, understanding the hidden systems that govern our lives, whether it's the protocol inside a microwave clock, the hidden syllabus of an institution, or the architecture of a global network, is the absolute first step to reclaiming your independence from them.
Stay curious.
And we will see you next time.